Welcome back to Old School Sports and our Out of the Park Baseball 23 playthrough of the Colorado Rockies. We are nearing the end of our first season as GM of the Rockies, 2049 season. You can see we are 60 and 66, and we have the best offense in baseball and the worst pitching and defense in baseball. So Coors Field has definitely had an impact on our results this year. And the big challenge of this playthrough is going to be figuring out a way to remain a great offense while improving our pitching and defense. And all of that hitting and all of those runs we've allowed have added up to a 60 and 66 record, 12 and a half back in the NL West. We actually have outscored our opponents by 33 runs. Pythagorean expectations were 6 games under where we're expected to be at 66 and 60. So I thought this was a 70 to 75 win kind of team. Right now we're on pace to be very slightly better than that. I think my goal over the last month and a half of the season is to get no worse than the 6 games under 500 that we are right now. So play 500 or better ball the rest of the way. Remain third place in the NL West would be a nice goal. And then hopefully not have any more significant injuries to the team. Goal this whole first season was just to kind of figure out what we had, start learning about what it takes to win, building a team in OOTP and Coors Field, and avoid serious injuries and get to know the players better, as I indicated. And it's been a tough year injury-wise for this team. Our starting left and right fielders at the start of the season, Yoshitaro Nakahara and Juan Gonzalez, both on the 60-day IL with significant injuries. A couple other outfielders, Alex Palacios and veteran Emmanuel Johnson, also on the IL, along with our starting third baseman, Jonathan Andrade, lefty reliever Jordan Stallworth, and then minor league starter Ramon Lopez, who's been out since late last season. But for the first time since the early stages of the season, we do have our top 4 in our starting rotation back. Can see Juan Vargas and Andres Erezeri have been pretty much going out there as expected. Stephen Moore and Jordan Medrano have combined for just 9 games so far this season. Moore's had a couple stints on the IL. Medrano has had 1. So got both of them back recently. And the hope is that with our top 4 starters now intact for hopefully the last month and a half of the season, we'll be able to play a little better on the field and finish up this season feeling good about the future. As we think about what we needed to achieve this season, we have increased revenue per game about 10%, but fan interest has plunged from 97 to 75, given our mediocre results on the field and some players that we've traded away over the course of the year. Thinking about ownership, they wanted us to play 500 ball. We're unlikely to achieve that goal, but we did upgrade at catcher, and we did sign all-star first baseman Jamal Cohen to an extension. So I think we should be in decent shape with management at the end of this year. Counting, we're on pace for a profitable season this year. Hopefully can make it even better. You can see we've made a bunch of trades and picked up a ton of cash over the course of the season, which has helped. How much of that will actually go into determining what our budget looks like next season is unexpected, or is uncertain. But certainly hope that next year we'll be operating with a slightly bigger budget than we did this year, given the fact that we've increased revenue by about $90,000 a game this year. But we will find that out once the season is over. And as I said, our goal is at least 500 ball the rest of the way. We'll see whether we're able to achieve that goal or not. And after simming a few days, the good news is that starting third baseman Jonathan Andrade, ready to come off the IL, and Jordan Stallworth and Emmanuel Johnson are both also healthy, have a little more time to spend on the IL. That's the good news. The bad news is since this episode started, we've lost four in a row to fall to 60 and 70. So not having a lot of luck here in August so far. We had been a respectable team. Honestly, the definition of a respectable team. 1 over in May, 500 in June, 500 in July, but a 4-10 record here in August has us reeling a bit at this point. Hopefully, the return of some of these injured players will help. Although exactly what we're going to do with Andrade is something we're going to need to give some thought to. 35-year-old, he's wrecked physically, and we do have him for one more year at $5.8 million. Was hitting 224 with 10 home runs before he got hurt, but we brought up to replace him prospect Alex Ortega, 25-year-old, and he's hit 237, but 14 home runs and 173 at bats. So I think we want to continue seeing what we've got with Ortega. Probably not going to make Andrade very happy, but we've got to do what's best for the medium and long-term future of this franchise. And Andrade is not part of our medium and long-term future. Alex Ortega could be. And as we get towards the end of the month of August here, season is definitely spiraling out of control for the Rockies. You can see we did end up losing 7 in a row before getting wins against San Francisco the last 2 days. But at 62 and 73, 459 winning percentage. This is kind of as bad as we've been in a while. And we have now dropped back to fourth place in the NL Central, and we're 3.5 behind the Diamondbacks. So they've been playing well. We have not, and it's showing in the standings. One small glimmer of hope, Bobby Perez, who was the first-round pick of the organization last year, number 78 prospect in baseball. We started him out this year at A ball and then moved him up to high A ball quickly. Moved him up to Hartford in Double A about 2 weeks ago, and he just won Player of the Week at that level. Has combined at this point for 32 home runs across those 3 levels. So he is certainly someone who could be helping us in the outfield maybe by this time next year. And as we're getting close to the end of this ugly August for the Rockies in the majors, trying to shift a few players around in the minors, Angel Cazares, number 88 prospect in baseball, one of our top 2 or 3 prospects, spent most of this year in A ball, hit just 251 with 15 homers, but he was just named Player of the Week. So we're moving up to high A ball for what that's worth. And then our number 1 draft pick from this past year, Israel Cota, spent a couple weeks in high A ball after a couple weeks in A ball, hit 345 at A, 333 at high A. He's 22 years old, college player, so we have just promoted him to Double A. Probably we'll see what he can do there the rest of the year, assuming he's not completely overmatched. He could be starting next year in Triple A for us. So we've made it to roster expansion, which will give us an opportunity to really just kind of get back to where we should have been. We had kind of avoided decision on Andrade. We're bringing him back up now that we've got spot, but we're going to continue to start Alex Ortega at third base. He's been more productive. He's younger. And honestly, I don't know how much we're going to be able to get for a 36-year-old third baseman making almost $6 million next year, who's wrecked physically, but would love to be able to maybe get out from under that contract when the offseason begins. Also, kind of just getting us back to where we were when we did bring the lefty reliever back up off of the IL. We finally did send Danny Araujo down to the minors, even though he's been really successful. Figured he'd be back in about a week and a half, and now he is. We still also have Angel Moreno and Javi Vargas, who both spent good chunks of the year on the major league team down there. So we're going to have some decisions to make. Don't want any serious injuries, but I think we're at the point of the season where if somebody gets a little banged up and they're going to be on the day-to-day for 7 days, put them on the 10-day IL and get a look at a few other players. Record stands at the beginning of September, 65 and 77. So after a pretty decent run with this team. August was an absolute disaster. 9-17 record, worst winning percentage we've had in any month. Any hope of getting to 500 this year was eliminated, and now we were 6 games under 500 when we started this episode and hoping to play 500 ball the rest of the way. Now we're 12 games under 500. Still have the best offense in baseball. Still have the worst pitching staff in baseball. And we're still positive in our run differential, plus 21 for the season. So we should be a winning team. We're blowing teams out and losing some close games, it sounds like. So we're getting near the end of this first season for us. You can see where we got a final game at Oakland. Then we've got San Diego in the division, St. Louis, the Dodgers, the Giants, the Twins, and then we'll finish up with Arizona. We are now how far behind Arizona? 5 games behind them for third in the NL Central. So that's going to be a tough task for us to get. I said I thought this was a 70 to 75 win team at the beginning of this year, and with this late swoon that we're under, it certainly seems like that's kind of the range that we're pretty likely to finish up in. And with 2 games left in the season, record stands at 73-87. So not really ending the year the way that we would have liked. Are going to be right in that 70 to 75 win range that we thought we would be. The Rockies won 75 games last year, so if we win these final 2 games, that'll allow us to at least match where the team was a year ago. But besides the month of April, basically having our 2 worst months of the season here in August and September, again, it would be nice if we win these last 2. That would get us to 500 for the month of September, and at least have us going into the offseason feeling slightly better about things. We did also just have an injury, kind of not the one we wanted. Young third baseman Alex Ortega dealing with back tightness, so we just threw him on the IL. Not going to play him the last 2 games. He ended up hitting .234 for us with 22 home runs and 282 at-bats. So certainly would be thinking about him as our potential third baseman next year. But we'll get to see a little bit more of Jonathan Andrade these last couple days. He has not been playing much since he came back up at the beginning of September, because we've been giving the vast majority of the time to the youngster rather than the 35-year-old. And the regular season is finally over. We split those final 2 games with the Diamondbacks. So we kind of failed in a lot of our goals. We were expecting to be a 70-75 win team at the beginning of the year, so we ended up in that range. But we wanted to be within 6 games of 500. We ended up 14 below 500. So rough September and August for us, unfortunately. Wanted to be 3rd in the division. We ended up in 4th. And we even actually ended up with a negative run differential when all was said and done. Still underperformed our Pythagorean expectations by 5 games. But it was kind of an ugly finish to the season for us. You can see we're no longer even the best offense in baseball, 2nd in baseball in offense, and worst in ERA. So the Coors Field factor definitely had an impact on the Rockies this year. We're going to have a full offseason coming up to really make some decisions on how to improve this team. And see that attendance really tailed off when we were struggling there in August and September. Revenue per game was up 4.5% from a year ago, but at one point we were hoping, and we were actually over $1 million a game in revenue about midway through the season, and then that really tailed off over the second half of the year. Fan interest dropped from 97 at the beginning of the year to 71, almost back to where we were when we took this team over. I think it was 67 when we took it over at the end of last year. So a little bit better position. 1 more loss than a year ago, went from 75 to 74 wins. So it will be interesting to get our evaluation from Mr. Monfort on the season. You know, the extensions and having the 4th ranked catcher in the game are both positive. but we definitely failed in his goal to play 500 ball. So we'll see what he has to say on that front. Taking a look at the accounting, actually ended up losing a little bit of money for the season. A little bit surprising to me. I guess I don't know that the cash from trades goes into that calculation, but it's hard for me to think how we could have ended up in that situation because we've got 12.5 million dollars that we didn't spend on free agents. We generated more revenue per game than the team did a year ago. But I'm not going to spend a ton of time trying to figure that out. I do think that the cash from trades doesn't necessarily go into that number. No, I mean, I guess it is a small minus. Yeah, but the cash doesn't go in. Yeah, because we lost. Revenue was 207.7 million. If I looked at the numbers, this would help. Expenses 207.8 million. So that's the $100,000 loss. But the $20,000 that we picked up for ownership in trades doesn't go into the season profit loss. But hopefully that will factor into what our budget looks like next year. We'll find out. It would really stink to be lower than we are this year. As we've talked about in previous episodes, we'll likely be moving on from Emmanuel Johnson. Could look to trade away Andres Irazzeri, as we've been talking about recently. Could look to trade Jonathan Andrade. So we are going to have some money opened up next year, even if we get cut back. But the goal is obviously not to have the budget get cut back in the wrong direction on us. That would be a really negative step for us. So as we kind of review the season, Andres Irazzeri was definitely respectable. 7-5 record, 4.47 ERA. One of the best pitchers on our staff. Juan Vargas, who we picked up in free agency last year, was an all-star. Finished 10-12, but a 5.52 ERA. So he definitely tailed off the second half of the year. Stephen Moore was solid in a fractured season. Jordan Medrano with a 6.06 ERA was not good in a fractured season. And then Chris Gonzalez as our fifth starter was 500 with a 4.49 ERA. So in the context of pitching in cores, not horrible. Tyrone Colbert, who we picked up in a trade from Detroit early July, ended up 4-5 with 6 saves. Spent some time as a starter, spent some time as in the bullpen. 5.22 ERA, not good. We do think the ground baller who throws pretty hard and has good movement on his pitches could be in the mix to be in the starting rotation for us next year, especially if we do trade away Irazzeri. Juan Bin Daoud, who was our closer at the beginning of the year, lost the job when Tolbert moved into the bullpen when we got Moore and Medrano back from the IL. Saved 24 games for us, but a 5.43 ERA. Nelson Escobedo is a guy who started some games for us, ended up finishing with a 9-14 record and a 5.93 ERA. Just some ugly numbers here. Ivan Mingetti, a 5.79 ERA. Victor Malone, 5.48. Elijah Ruiz, 5.07. Ethan Mingo, 6.55, even after we picked him up. So he certainly did not perform the way we would have hoped in the 14 games he pitched for us. The only kind of somewhat bright spots in the bullpen, lefty Jordan Stallworth did spend some time on the IL, but still put up a 3.58 ERA with 100 strikeouts over 102 innings. And then Danny Arujo, who was splitting time between AAA and the big club, 2.37 ERA over 38 innings at the major league level. The 25-year-old is one of the younger pitchers on the team, and would think that he would potentially, with the likes of guys like Colbert, maybe Escobedo, Chris Gonzalez, those are the guys that win. Stephen Moore, those are the type of guys that we may be looking to build this thing around a bit next year. The guys in their mid-30s making huge money like Irazzeri, probably gone. And then Vargas likely will be back. As I mentioned, he was an all-star this year, but the ultimate numbers he put up were not that impressive. Let's just take a look at his splits, though, to see see what the difference is. Yeah, he wasn't really good anywhere. 6.29 ERA at home is obviously brutal, but a 4.77 road ERA for him is pretty disappointing for a guy whose career ERA is 3.79. So was a rough transition for him to the National League and to Colorado after spending his entire career in the AL before he joined us last offseason. Moving on to our good offense. We already talked about our young third baseman who's on the IL right now. Victor Gonzalez, think we've got our catcher for the next few years with the trade we made for him. Had a nice bounce back season, 23 homers, 76 ribbies, 257 average. And he definitely benefited from being at Coors where his batting average was about 30 points higher. And his home run percentage was higher with one more home run in 24 fewer at-bats than on the road. But he was respectable in both, also named an all-star. So feel good about him. Alex Ortiz, the backup catcher, did fine. 275 home runs, 159 at-bats. He could very well be back in that role next year. Jamel Cohen, 44 homers, 124 ribbies, a vintage Jamel Cohen season. He will be back next year after signing an extension. Jose Brito, the Rule 5 pick, 267 average, 10 homers, and 240 at-bats. He's pretty much kind of developed at this point. So probably no need for more seasoning in AAA next year. It's just a matter of whether he's going to make the team or not. Danny Jackson, second baseman, had some injury issues, still hit almost 300 with 6 homers in a little less than 300 at-bats. Victor Mirakin, 301 at-bats and a 312 average. So he actually got more playing time than Jackson and Brito, despite the fact that he wasn't... He started some games for us, don't get me wrong. He started almost half the games for us, but was not really in the plans to be doing that. But injuries gave him opportunities. Jonathan Andrade ended up hitting 231 with 14 homers. As we've talked about, we'll probably look to try to get out from under that contract. All-star shortstop Juan Castillo, big bounce back year, his first year with the Rockies. 277 average, 19 homers, 51 doubles, led the league. His OPS plus was only a little bit above league average. His WRC plus looks better. Put up a 3.7 WAR for us, one of the better figures on the team. Edgar Velasquez had a couple very short stints with us. He'll be in the mix for a roster spot next year. Andrew Booker tailed off to hit just 316. He was batting over 350 at the All-Star break. Still ended up with 31 homers and 101 ribbies. The 25-year-old figures to be a very important player for us the next few years, and we'll see where we are in a budgetary situation when he starts looking to make more money. Manuel Johnson, a longtime player, final year of his contract, 281 average, 25 homers, kind of a vintage Emmanuel Johnson season for the Rockies. He's wrecked physically, going to be 37 next year. Hard to imagine he'll be back. Center fielder Tony Padilla had a long stint on the IL. Still hit 278 with 8 home runs. 25-year-old, decent defensively, decent offensively. Probably will be back in that role next year. Marvin Rodriguez is a guy we picked up in June in a trade with San Francisco. Kind of be a 4th and 5th outfielder for us. Ended up starting some games because we did pick him up right when Padilla got that injury. Hit just 226, certainly in the mix for a roster spot next year. And then last but not least, Alex Palacios, minor league free agent signing from us in February of this year. Ended up playing a huge role for us because of all the injuries to the outfield. Had 409 at-bats, hit 264, 30 doubles, 12 homers. Probably will not be back with us next year at the age of 33. But he did do yeoman's work given all of the injuries that we were dealing with. Guy who was supposed to be our starting left fielder, Yoshitaro Nakahara, hit 274 with 12 ribbies and just 62 at-bats. Guy who was going to be our starting right fielder, Juan Gonzalez, just 11 games played, 9 at-bats, 4 home runs and 34 at-bats, although he did hit just a buck 76, but he's been out since late April with a broken kneecap. Hopefully both of those guys come back healthy. Alex Ortega, we talked about, could be our third baseman next year, and Ramon Lopez will likely be a AAA pitcher for us. He's been out with a torn flexor tendon for a year and a half at this point. Who knows what he's going to look like? Did look like he was a guy who could potentially help us out, but after that serious injury, we'll be interested to get a new scouting report back on him in spring training of next year. Hopefully 3 months left on that injury, so hopefully he'll be ready to go in February and March for us. Digging a little deeper into some of the stats, you can see we were slightly better at home than on the road, but only 2 games better. What we want to ultimately do is build a team where we've got a home field advantage, and not much of a home field advantage at this point. You know, part of it is that the roster was not great. Part of it was that, we're just starting to build this team and figure out what will work at cores, particularly in terms of pitching. So that's what this offseason is going to be totally focused on. Hopefully we'll get a little bit of a boost to our budget. Who knows? And then we can hit the offseason hard, trying to trade away some of the contracts that we don't want, and then hit both free agency and the trade market to hopefully have a team next year that is more competitive than this team this year. Obviously, we haven't done anything yet. The season just ended today. The playoffs haven't even begun. But I'll tell you what my goal next year is going to be. It's going to be to get this team to 500 and then hopefully be fighting for a playoff spot the season after that. So don't know what we're going to do to get there. Don't know how I'm going to be feeling after this coming off season. But the goal is to be feeling like we've got a 500 team when we break spring training March of 2050. And I'd be remiss if I didn't check in on our former team in Pittsburgh. And they had a worse year than us by 10 games. After 2 straight appearances in the World Series, the Pirates just plunged to 64-98 this year. If I remember correctly, at the beginning of the season, we ran the projections, and they had them projected at 98-64. So just a horrible drop off for that Pirates organization compared to where we had that team. We had made the playoffs, I believe, all of these years. So 8 consecutive playoff appearances with the Pirates, World Series appearances in 2047 and 2048, and got ugly real quick for the Pirates this past year. Oh, look at the revenues. We were up over $1 million a game, and they dropped to under $700,000 a game this year. So they've moved into rebuilding mode. They've cut their scouting and development budgets way back. Not a great situation, but also not our problem anymore. I wonder if, Nutting Jr. is still the owner. It looks like he hasn't sold the team after he took over for his father. So his demanding, penny-pinching, and meddling ways were too much for us to deal with. So we decided to move on, and we've taken on a new challenge. And at the very least, our Rockies were a lot better than the Pirates were this past season, which is a bit shocking to me. And as we get closer to finding out who's going to win the World Series, we're experiencing some of the drama that can only come from poor programming. Ethan Mingo, you remember we picked him up in the trade, former player of ours with the Pirates, who we picked up before the trade deadline. Didn't pitch great for us, but does have potential to either be a member of our rotation or a member of our bullpen going forward. PM'd us after the season had started. Thought he could contribute a lot more as a member of the starting rotation. And then just recently, earlier this week, came back and requested a trade because we're not using him as a member of the starting rotation. So I don't really know how I'm supposed to address that with him from after the season, and then 3 weeks later when he hasn't played because we haven't played a single game, he's requesting a trade. Seems a little off to me. I guess what I can do, and this is just really, really hokey, we'll go to a 6-man rotation right now, Ethan, and we'll put you in the starting rotation. Will that make you feel better about things? But you would think that seems like kind of a weird thing to have him go from I want to be into the starting rotation when there's no games left to be played and the season is over to requesting a trade 3 weeks later when he's not in the starting rotation because we haven't actually played any games. And the Atlanta Braves are your 2049 Major League Baseball World Series champions. They beat the Baltimore Orioles. Both teams kind of came out of the wild card round. Both teams won 2-1 in the wild card round. Both teams won 3-1 on the road against highly regarded teams. Both teams took the LCSs 4-2. So I thought it might be a pretty tight matchup. But then the Braves, after losing Game 1 of the series, won 4 in a row to beat the Orioles. On paper, the Braves were a 94-win team. The Orioles a 91-win team. So both fairly competitive. But the Braves end up winning the title. And now we will get to find out our fate for next year. Offseason begins. Letting some personnel go. Let's get into the review of the season goals, the new budget, and we can see we've got our contract extended, so I guess that's positive. Review of the season goals. Team record, fans not happy, not a surprise. Happy with our upgrade at catcher. Happy with our extension for Jamel Cohen. Happy that we made progress on attendance. Doesn't feel too confident right now. Wants to see some progress towards the playoffs next year. But he's ecstatic with our performance in accomplishing the goals. But that's not the only thing he evaluates us on. Wants us to play close to 500 next year, get a hometown player, continue increasing attendance, find a top 20 prospect, reach the playoffs in the next 4 seasons. We'll see about the hometown player thing, but I already talked about want to be 500 next year. Going to focus on increasing attendance. I think between our pick in the draft and the international amateur free agent we signed, it's conceivable that we might have a top 20 prospect with one of them. Will be interesting to see what those ratings look like. Actually, we'll take a quick look at that right now before we do the other stuff. We're up to the number 11 system in baseball, so that's some progress this year. And Joel Bueno, our international amateur free agent, 23rd prospect in baseball. Israel Cota, who we picked up in the first round, 106th prospect in baseball. So neither of them are quite there yet, but with 2 of our top 6 prospects being guys that we picked up this year, feel like we are starting to make a little bit of progress. Check in on Cota and what he did after we promoted him to AAA. Struggled there a little bit, 217 average, so that was kind of his first challenging situation in his minor league career. We'll have to take a look through the organization, figure out whether we want him to be in AA or AAA when next year begins. New budget, unchanged at $200 million. So that's not great. At least it didn't go down when the fact that we, other than the money that we picked up in trades, actually had a small loss for a year. Was a little worried about that. He's extended our contract 3 years, $1.7 million a year, so I guess that is good news. Taking a quick look at the front office screen, we will have some money to spend next year. And as I've talked about, we will be thinking about whether we can get out from that Eritzeri contract. Let's see how he's feeling now. Still not willing to waive the no trade clause, but that could change as we get into free agency. Probably not going to be bringing Johnson back. Could be looking to get out from that Andrade contract. So there's potential for us just with Andrade and Eritzeri to open up about another $27 million for next year, which would put us in a position where we could be players in free agency if we wanted to at any level with over $50 million. So going to be an interesting offseason. If you've got thoughts on what we should do, would love to hear them in the comments down below. Until our next episode, thanks so much for watching and hope you have a great day.